Hi, welcome back. In this video I'll show how to paint foliage with scripts in the Giants editor. Let's start up in our editor. First off, we need the layer we want to paint. Data plane by name, and what we're actually selecting. First off, we need to give it terrain ID. Let's just figure out our root nodes. Get a child named terrain. Okay, and then we need to give a name for our terrain layer. That name would be over here in our foliage tab. Sorry. This is the foliage layer name. So for now, we're going to name this one, they go foliage. That should be our layer. We can already choose our channel. For now, that would be this. We'll take the first one, small dense mix would be 1. Once we have our layer, we need to create a modifier. This would be a density map modifier. And it needs our layer. It needs some settings for the foliage layer, and lastly our terrain. Maybe we should store our terrain somewhere. That should be our terrain. Okay, then we can reuse it. Once we have a modifier, we can clear polygon points. I think we'll check this later on, or maybe we do it right now. In the UTL somewhere we have this one. We can pass in our modifier. Maybe we need to include our script. Okay, and now we can see the clear points should be here somewhere. This one, oh, didn't work. And then we also need an add point. This one. And in the end, we'll also need an execute set, something to actually run our changes. Execute set is probably right, and we'll need to pass a channel. Okay, now when we're adding points, we also need to tell it which points we're adding. We'll see if we made any mistakes. It's running fine. We don't need the debugging window anymore. So let's remove that over here. So now when we exit this mode, we'll go to the center of our map. But we'll just move it up here. What this modifier is doing, it takes a list of points, or actually you can add points by running this function, and it will create a shape connecting all the points in the order you add them, and fill in the channel that we select over here by name, and or the layer and the channel, this one. The layer state, maybe we'll rename it layer state. This would be this one. We have our layer and our layer state. So one coordinate we're not going to see much. Let's add a second one a little bit to the side, and a third one, so we actually have an area to fill. And when we run this, we should see the area connecting our 3 dots. This is 0, 0. Then we have 0, 10, so let's update it over here. This is our next point. Then we have 10, then, so that should be our third point. If you want to add a fourth point, we could say, let's make this 0, that point. And now we're painting the whole square. We'll remove this for now and we'll paint it again. So we're painting the whole area. That's nice, but we want something more than squares. Usually we'll have something set up like a spline. We'll create one over here. We'll close it up by pressing O. Go over to our shape and set it to linear so we only see our points. To start with, now over here in our code, we can actually select our spline. We'll make sure it's the only thing we select. And once we have our spline, we can loop through our control points. Spline, this one, -1. We'll put this above our spline. And for each point in our spline, we want to add a modifier point and eventually run the whole set. Now the point we want to add for each point on the spline, we first need to fetch it. Expect the spline and the ID. That's great because we already have the ID, and it would output the coordinates. Don't need the Y position. And we can use the coordinates over here to add them. Let's run our set again. And now we're filling the spline with whatever channel we are selecting. Let's look at something else, maybe meadow. We can run our code again, and it's not filling anything. That's interesting. Let's look at what we're doing. Maybe there is nothing configured because the first one is invisible. That's why we were seeing nothing, because our layer state was 1. But when we fill it with green small, which would be 2, or let's add middle, that would be 3. Run our code again, and it fills our spline. By following the control vertices. Now let's do a normal spline. Add one over here. Do the same thing again. Make some funky shapes, it really doesn't matter. We'll close it up again by pressing O. Now we have a normal spline. If we would run our old logic on this, we would see that our corners are very strange because we're actually following the blue dots. Let's switch that up. And instead of our control points, let's select our editing points. And our editing points are the red dots. Now we don't see any change because it was already painted. So let's clear that. And now the fill is within the spline and not going outside of it, over here. But it's still not what we want. We actually want the fill to follow along the curve of the spline. So we can do that by looping over the spline another way. First, let's store how long the spline is. Selected. We'll need a step value, let's say every half meter, and we need the position on the spline that we are currently on. Now instead of looping through our control vertices, let's go for a while loop. Our spline position is smaller or equal to 0. We're going to loop, and at the end of our loop we'll add our step value over our length. So we'll move the length every time. And we add the points. This one is not going to work anymore. So we need to get the position on the spline. Time. That's exactly what we're looping through. So that should work. Now when we remove this and we run our code again, it's crashing the editor. What did we do wrong? We have an infinite loop over here. Because this will be a small value every time. That's too bad, because we'll have to start over. Is there any way to save that? I don't think there is. Let's do that again. We'll start from here. Store our terrain. Create our layer. We had a layer state set to something like this. Then we had a modifier. And we were going to add a point for each point on our spline. So we had a spline loop. First off, we had a spline. The spline length. And a position. This is the part we forgot earlier. Every time we need to add the new value to our current spline position, and the value was our step over our length. And the values we need to add, we still need to fetch. Don't need that value. For our spline at the current position, and once everything is done, we'll run the execute set for not for channel but for our layer state, and then I think we have everything back where we left off. Now before we run this, we'll select everything and copy it to make sure we don't have the same problem, because we didn't even create a spline. So our script will crash anyway. Now we can create a spline. Place it over here, take the point. Create a funky shape. We'll remove some foliage to see if it's actually working. We need to select our spline, run our code, and now we're back. And the foliage has been filled following the curved spline. That's great. Now we have this code. Let's create some kind of tool set around it. Let's go to our app data and over to our scripts folder. We'll start with our simple example. Select everything, create a new toolkit, Spline-based toolkit. We can paste in our example. We'll just update these parts. Now we have a window. We can close the editor, reopen it, and it should show our tool. While that is running over here, we can change our button to say paint grass. And I made exactly the same mistake. I closed the editor without saving what was open, but luckily I still have it on my clipboard, because now we can paste this into our button. And our button should run what we created earlier. Our editor has started. We're going to reload our scripts. And now we should see our spline-based toolkit. We'll create a spline first. We'll place it over here, do the same thing. We select it, we run the toolkit. It gives us a window with a button. And the button paints grass for us. That's nice. Let's clean this up a little bit. We'll take all that stuff out again. We'll create a new function called paint spline. All of our stuff in here again. So over here we can just say paint spline. We'll pull this spline part up over here. And we'll pass our spline in here. Maybe we'll do the same thing with the layer name and the layer state. And then we can say take off foliage over here, which layer we actually want. So this should do the same thing, but now we have a clean function. Let's try that out when we save it. We open our tool again. Select our spline, paint, nothing seems to happen. That's great. Let's add a second button, but let's add everything in a row. Be bigger grass, and because we now have a function we can just say use bigger foliage. Let's look at our script. Now we have two buttons. We can choose for this type of grass or this type of grass. It's not really grass, but foliage, because it's a deco foliage. Let's maybe rename it to option 2 and option 3. And of course we'll add an option 1. And maybe before our row we'll also add a new choice input. We'll have a look at what a choice input needs. It needs options. Perfect, we can give it options. For example, we were working with deco foliage, or what do we have available? Looking at the wrong thing. Meadow or deco bush, maybe. Let's add a mode. Now we have some choice options, and when you select something, it will run the callback. For now, let's print our value. Save, go back to our editor. We have three options. We have a drop down to select something, but we're not doing anything with our selection yet. We can, however, press our options to see the different channel types or the layer types in effect. Let's connect our selection by storing it somewhere. Let's create a namespace. We're creating a Spline-based toolkit. So we can also update this in front of here. We can add namespace over here. This is still the same, but now we can add an option over here to save our selected foliage. We'll give it a default value. We'll also save our option layers. Maybe this is also a selected layer. And our available layers that were over here can now move up. And this becomes available layers. And when we select a new layer, we actually want to update our selected layer with our available layers with the value that we have selected. So now we're updating this with the values we have selected from over here. Over here we still need to pass the value, so this can be updated to the selected layer. Let's save that. Now we can say we want meadow. Nothing happens because the first option is invisible. I think yes, because the second option works. The third option works, and when we switch to another, you can press option 1 and it paints the foliage we select within our spline. Now it's still, when we have a look at this, we're still working with this selection. We had a way better method of working with that, and that was this one. So we'll run that over here. We can do our run for selected splines, and we need to pass it a function. And this function will be passed a spline, so we can update that for all of our options. We can save, we can reload, we should have closed that. Now our spline toolkit should still do exactly the same. Okay, it's still painting foliage. Maybe let's remove it to make it more obvious what is happening. With all the layers cleared, you can add some foliage, but now we can add multiple splines. We add a second spline over here. We can select multiple splines and still use our tool, and it will work on all the splines. And maybe if we don't select any splines, our tool will first warn us, maybe select some splines before running anything, because this is a spline tool after all. So I think that's the basics for painting terrain. Have fun!